Well, I mean, first of all, thank you for taking time out of your week, your family time, your work time or whatever to be here. This Oldham lecture is a first in what we hope to be a series of lectures, really. And it's intended to get people in Oldham just to start talking about issues in a constructive way, but also maybe dealing with some of the tricky issues that we've put to one side, or issues that we've allowed other people to come and form a view onto us, rather than us form a view ourselves about where the town's going. So the first in the series is Matthew Taylor. Matthew worked with Tony Blair, both pre-97, when obviously we went into the election, but also as the strategy director under the Prime Minister as well. He's currently the Chief Executive at the RSA, and a fantastic boost that Matthew has taken the time to come to Oldham today. This is part of getting the Oldham conversation going, but it is fantastic when people give up their time to come and help the debate get going. So Matthew.
Well, thanks, Jim. And this visit's already worthwhile because of the half an hour that you and I have just had together. And I think Oldham's in safe hands with you as leader, and you combine, this is something I'm going to come back to, a kind of really strong vision for the place with a really acute understanding of the challenges that you face. I was a politician for a while. In the 1980s, I was a county councillor for a few years, and I could never do it because people are so rude. That's what I found. I never forget, we were trying to turn the grammar schools in Warwickshire into comprehensives. It was a completely futile exercise, actually, because there was a Conservative government which was never going to approve the plans, and it was a hung council, and the Liberal Democrats were never going to vote for it, but it was in our manifesto, and in the 1980s it was in the manifesto. You had to do it, however stupid it was. So I remember being at a public meeting in Stratford upon Avon, and there were hundreds of parents there, furious about the idea that we might take away their grammar school. And anyway, right at the end, this guy came up to me. I never forget it. He said to me, who do you think you are? And I said, well, what do you mean? He said, it's absolutely disgraceful. And I said, well, what are you talking about? He said, well, what you're wearing. Because I wasn't wearing a tie or a suit, I was wearing a jacket and a shirt. And he said, it's disgraceful. And I said to him, look, I'm just wearing ordinary clothes. I'm just an ordinary person. Yes, he said, I'm rather afraid you are. And I could have thought at that moment, I'm not cut out to be a politician, really, because sometimes you're supposed to be special and sometimes you're supposed to be ordinary, and I could never quite work out when I should be which. I made a decision on the way here today, which is that there are lots of speeches I can make, and we've got time for questions. So if you think what I'm going to say in the next 20 minutes is all a bit kind of weird and wild and theoretical, then you can ask me proper questions afterwards, and I can demonstrate to you that I do know quite a lot of stuff. But I actually decided what I wanted to do was to use this time to talk about ideas that really interest me and to see whether or not they've got any relevance for you, whether they work for you, whether they're powerful for you. And I'll take the risk that they're not. The only risk you're taking is that you just have to wait 20 minutes before you can start having some more snacks and nibbles or hurl abuse at me. It's up to you. I want to talk about how we tackle wicked problems. So, first of all, one way of thinking about the challenges that Britain faces at the moment, but also the challenges that a place like Oldham faces, is that there is a kind of gap. And that's a gap between the future most people say they want and the future that we're actually going to create if we carry on thinking and behaving as we do right now. So actually, I don't think it is, even in a place like Oldham, which has got its divisions, I don't think it is that people have got violently different ideas of the kind of place they want to live in. They want a society that is, it's successful, it's affluent, they can get on. They want a society that's tolerant and inclusive, but has a shared set of values. They want a society that's free, but also a society that's fair. So we don't really disagree about that stuff, I don't think. But the problem is, we're not on track to create that kind of society. So there's a gap between the aspirations that we've got and the trajectory that we're on. Now, I call that gap the social aspiration gap. And that's because I was trained as a sociologist, so I have to use the most opaque language I can possibly use. I don't know if any of you studied sociology, but sociologists have a joke, which is, what do you get when you cross a sociologist with a member of the mafia? And the answer is someone who makes you an offer you can't understand. So I'll try to avoid using kind of difficult language if I can avoid it, but it's a social aspiration gap. It's a gap between what we want and the trajectory that we're on. Now, part of the reason for that gap is we face these issues that I call wicked issues. And what do I mean by a wicked issue? It's not my phrase, it's a phrase that's been around for some time, but wicked issues, they're complicated. They involve lots of people acting together. It's not like building a bypass, or passing a law, or other things which have got kind of quite a simple, buying a car, whatever it might be, you know, something which is a relatively simple thing to do, the beginning and the end. These are very complex things. They involve lots of people working together, and crucially, wicked issues involve people themselves changing their ways of thinking, their norms, their expectations, their attitudes. They can't be solved otherwise. So if you want to take a classic example of a wicked issue, it's social care right now. Because social care is partly about the funding mechanism the government has, it's partly about new forms of care, but it's also about ageism, it's about caring in society, it's about our attitudes, our expectations, it's about the fact that when people are young they don't save enough money for when they're going to be old, it's all those kinds of things. So it's a complex issue that requires changes in our behaviour. And I think that many of the things that we want but we're not achieving are like that. They're problems which require us to change. They're not just problems about better government policy. And we get angry with the government because the government doesn't give us what we want, even though what we want often doesn't make much sense. So the country's leading pollster is a guy called Ben Page, and Ben Page has done more polling than anything else, and he says what the British people want is very simple. What they want is Swedish welfare on American taxes. So we kind of blame government for not giving us the things that we want, when often the things that we want will mean challenges for us and changes for us. So I think if you think about a place like Oldham and the kinds of issues that it's got, these are wicked problems. They are not problems that can be solved by the council passing a policy. They're not problems that can be solved by one action or even a simple plan. They're something that's going to involve lots of people acting together in all sorts of complex ways over a long period of time in order to make progress. So what I want to talk about today is one way of thinking about those wicked problems. And this is where, unashamedly, I'm going to be a bit theoretical, but it's not a complex bit of theory, but I think it's a really important bit of theory. It's a way of understanding how it is you might solve those problems. So this bit of theory says that there are really 4 ways of thinking about change in the world. And 4 ways of responding to a challenge where you have to change. And this might be, by the way, anything from in your family to your workplace to the council to the United Nations. You can see these 4 ways of thinking about change. And they basically fit how we think ourselves when we make a decision. So when we're faced with a decision, we've got 4 choices. We can do what we're told, we can do what's good for the group, we can do what we want, or we can shrug our shoulders and say it doesn't really matter what we do. Now, I've got another theory, which I won't go into today, which says that's really hardwired in human beings as a species for reasons of our evolution. But nevertheless, put that to one side. So these are 4 ways of thinking about change. And in this theory, and these words don't really matter, but in this theory, those 4 ways have got different names. So the way of thinking about change, which is it's about leadership, it's about power, it's about authority, it's about strategy, it's about expertise. That's the hierarchical way of thinking about change. That's the thing which is do what you're told. If only we had the right leadership, if only the right experts in control, then we could solve things. The second way of thinking about things, which is let's do what the group wants, this theory calls egalitarian. And that's a view that says to change the world, we've all got to change the way we live. It's all about solidarity, it's about compassion, it's about shared values, it's about all of us acting together. Then the third view of the world, which is the one that goes with I'll do what I want, is individualistic, which says the way to make change happen in the world is to set people free. Let them be entrepreneurial, innovative, let them follow their ambitions. If people just did what they wanted, the world would be a much, much better place. Don't get in the way of all of that. And the fourth way of thinking about the world, which is it doesn't matter, is fatalism. It's just kind of, who cares? Now, if that's all sounding a bit abstract, let me apply it to a particular issue so that you can see how those views work. So think about climate change. Think about the environment and climate change, and I'll tell you what those 4 views mean. So in terms of climate change, the hierarchical view is to solve climate change, what we need is we need all the governments in the world to come together and sign a treaty and change the law And if all the governments in the world and all the scientists in the world got together, signed a treaty and changed the law, then we could solve the problem. Then the egalitarian view is actually we can only save the world if we all give up capitalism and consumerism. We all start knitting our own yogurt, you know what I mean. We don't fly anymore, we all live completely organic, sustainable. The way we live is terrible. We've got to change all our values. That's the egalitarian way of viewing change. And then the individualistic way of thinking about climate change is it'll be solved by markets and technology. It's just another challenge. Human beings have had all sorts of challenges. The Stone Age didn't end because we ran out of stone. It ran because people, it changed because people invented new things. Markets will solve it, technology will solve it. Just let human ingenuity resolve the problem. And then the fatalistic view is it's not true, all this climate change nonsense, it's just put up by people in power. Or if it is true, human beings won't do anything about it until, the sea is lapping around their necks. Forget it. I'm off shopping. Now, what I want to argue, are you with me so far? Yeah, okay. So what I want to argue today is this, that to make change happen, when it's really difficult, when it's wicked, it's a wicked problem, you have to use all of those ways of thinking about change. It's no good just relying on one model of change. You've actually got to get change in all those areas together if you're going to solve the problem. That's why they're wicked problems. If you could solve them just by having clever people in charge, they wouldn't be wicked problems, they'd be solved. I used to work in government. I can tell you, if there was a policy that just made everybody happier, it would have been passed a long time ago. Yeah? So you need to combine those things, and if you don't combine hierarchy, individualism, egalitarianism, you don't combine those forms of power, then what people fall back on is the fourth one, which is just to shrug their shoulders and say there's nothing we can do about it. Now, what does that lead me to? Well, it leads me to ask you a set of questions about Oldham, and this is what I wanted to do to frame the conversation. I hope, Jim, you might respond to what I'm going to say. So let's think about the question in relation to those three dimensions of change, those three bits of power that exist. And by the way, all of you sometimes are hierarchists. If you've got kids, you're probably hierarchical with them most of the time. Sometimes you're egalitarians, it's, us against the boss. Sometimes you're individualists, you're just going to go and get what you want, you're going to buy that new car, whatever it might be, and sometimes you're fatalists. I support West Bromwich Albion, so that's where I put my fatalism. So you've got all this inside yourself, by the way. So we have to release all of that power to solve this problem. And very often, by the way, Labour has tended to think it's all going to be hierarchalism. If we just take this issue off people and sort it out ourselves, because although we love working class people, we don't really trust them. So we'll solve it and then it'll all be okay. And generally speaking, you might have noticed that doesn't kind of work terribly well. And the conservative view of the world, by the way, generally speaking, is just individualism. Just take everything away, let individuals do their own thing, and that'll be fantastic. And as you might have noticed, the credit crunch, that theory doesn't work terribly well either. And by the way, in case you think egalitarianism works, it doesn't. Communes nearly always collapse very, very quickly. They collapse because they can't make any bloody decisions. Okay? All right? So let's think about those three dimensions, and let's think about what you need, what might be needed. So the first one is that leadership thing. So what kind of leadership does Oldham need? Now, I don't know the answer to that, but let me say some of the characteristics that I think of the kind of leadership we need. We need leadership. Too much of the leadership we get, political leadership, it's not big enough, it's not bold enough in terms of its mission, but it's very controlling in its means. So what we have is politicians that argue about things which feel very technical. They don't feel about the big society, the good society. They don't feel exciting, they don't move us. But yet politics is still very tribal, it's very secret, we don't trust them. So the kind of leadership we need is we need leaders who have got big visions, who go out on a limb and say, this is what we could achieve together. This is our vision for my vision, our vision for the place that we can be. But their style of leadership needs to be collaborative, it needs to be open, it needs to be discursive, it needs to be leadership about asking the right questions, not trying to provide the right answers. And you've got to be a very strong leader to say, I don't know the answers to this. I know what the questions are, and I want now all of us to discuss how it is we get the answer. So I know what my vision is for Oldham, and these are the questions we've got to answer together, because I don't have the answers myself. We're going to work on them together. And incidentally, in my view, political leadership now needs to operate as if every meeting you have, there's citizens sitting in the room listening to what you're doing. The idea of secrecy, the idea of covering up difficult decisions because you can't trust people, and because the local newspaper will make a row about it, you just have to go through that pain barrier, in my view. And we have to treat political and policy decision making as if it's completely open, and we invite people to get involved in that. So there's a set of questions about the kind of leadership we want. What about that second dimension, egalitarianism, shared values? Well, I don't have to say in a place like Oldham that that's a difficult issue, because this is a place which has got different communities with different values. It's got well-off people and not such well-off people. It's got the Asian community, it's got the white community. There's probably more things that I'm not aware of. So that challenge is, what are these shared values that we can mobilise? And I've got some thoughts about some of the things you might do in that regard, and we can maybe talk about them. But the one thing I'd say is absolutely crucial to understand about that energy, the energy which exists, which is to do with solidarity. And that is, it's the really easy way to mobilise people is anger. You know, the way you get people out on the streets is to tell them that the paedophiles are moving into their neighbourhood, you know, or to get a petition to stop something happening. And that's fine, and a lot of people I know talk about community development, community engagement, community organising, and that's what they mean, get people to protest. Well, you know, that's fine, but actually there's not much evidence that if you start people off by protesting, you can then get them into mode of solving their own problems. And actually the kind of solidarity we need is solidarity about problem solving together. It's about people saying, not let's all get together and march on the town hall. It's let's all get together and see if we can find solutions ourselves. It's tapping into that long history of mutual self-help. Ideas around friendly societies and whatever, you talk about the cooperative council, which have got a strong theme around here. So when we talk about mobilising people, we should not mobilise people around a common enemy. We have to mobilise people around the idea that they can find solutions themselves, that they can solve problems themselves. Now, how do we do that? How do we do that in a place like Oldham? What is the basis for that? What is the infrastructure for that? And then finally, in terms of individualism. So the argument about individualism is this. We often talk about individualism as if it's something bad, or people on the left do anyway. They think it's like about consumerism or selfishness. But what I mean by individualism is a sense that people feel that they can create the life that they want, and that it's worth investing in creating the life that they want. So that's about kids in school who have an idea of the job that they want to do or the business they want to set up, and because they have an idea of the job they want to do, and an idea of the business that they want to set up, it's worth doing that extra homework, it's worth sticking in those lessons, it's worth staying on for sixth form or whatever it might be, because they have that belief in the future. And that issue of aspirations and expectations is a really important one, and I think it very often gets left out of the equation. In my sense, a place like Oldham needs a great kind of burst amongst its people of aspiration, that the individual people believe that they can have better futures, and by the way, better futures that don't involve just getting out of Oldham as quickly as they can. So if you're going to solve some of the challenges that you face in Oldham, you're going to have to think about the right form of leadership, a form of leadership that fits, that engages people, that is leadership with people. It inspires them, but it is with them. You're going to have to think about what are the things that will mobilise this community? What is the capacity which exists in the community to solve its own problems? And you need to think about how it is you tap into people's aspirations for themselves and their families. And you have to do all those things at once. So, you know, it's incredibly difficult. I can't pretend to you that charting a course from a place which has got lots of strengths but also lots of challenges like Oldham to where you need to be is easy. But what I want to say to you is you have to tap into all of that exists. But it is possible. It is possible to achieve major changes. And maybe when we're in questions or whatever, we can talk about some of those examples of places that have changed, things that have been done differently. I just want to give you 2 or 3 examples. They're tiny little things in a way, but they're examples of how it is people were able to put things together to achieve changes. And they're very odd examples, but I like examples where something's actually happened. So think about London Challenge, which was a project which worked with schools in London when London was underperforming across the board, but found a way for schools which combined getting those schools to be more accountable for their performance, but also collaborating much more effectively together, but also sharing a set of values, and that transformed the performance of London schools in a very short period of time. This is often an example which people find odd, but nevertheless I'm going to share it with you. Part of what I'm talking about is that there's a lot of energy and capacity which exists in the community which you can tap into if you give them something which people want to do. So if I was to ask you which is the public service which has changed most in the last 20 or 30 years in terms of mobilising people so that people themselves help to create that public service? No? It's refuse collection. Because 30 years ago you just put your rubbish in a bag and stuck it in the garden, 10 years ago, and now, especially if you've got teenage children who are fascists when it comes to this, you spend more time recycling your rubbish and putting it, and actually nobody minds doing that. It's fine, everyone's happy doing that. So we've got recycling rates going up and up and up and up and up, not because we spend more money on it, but just because we tapped into the fact that people wanted to do the right thing, we enabled them to do the right thing, we shared the right values, the council provided the recycling service, and there you are, suddenly something's created, didn't cost any money, it just happened because it tapped into that combination of people's values and what they were individually willing to do and the right kind of framework. And I'm going to give you a final example, which is from a school. The RSA has 4 academies, and one of our academies had a problem with bullying. And they spent ages trying to tackle this problem of bullying. And they did all the things you should do, punished people and encouraged people, and the teachers spent time on it. And in the end, they asked the pupils to solve the problem. So they turned the problem over to the pupils, and the pupils designed their way of solving the problem. They worked with the teachers, because they're young kids. But they solved the problem, and there's no bullying in the school at all anymore, because what they tapped into was that the kids didn't want the bullying to happen as well. So instead of finding a solution for them, why didn't they work with those people, work with those children? Because actually the children wanted to stop bullying more than anybody else. But they'd always been seen as part of the problem, and in fact they were the solution. So to finish what I'm going to say, and then let's have a conversation here. I believe that there is all the energy that you need to make Oldham a great place in Oldham. It's here. Think of those children who are solving the bullying problem. Think of the time you spend recycling, you don't mind doing it so that recycling rates go up. Think of London Challenge and how it was those schools got together and suddenly London performance went from being one of the worst in the country to being one of the best in the country. It is possible to achieve that kind of change. All that you need is in your community. But if you're going to take all that potential and release it in order that Oldham can be the place that it needs to be, then you need to combine the right kind of leadership, the right kind of mobilisation and solidarity, and also tap into the desire of every individual to have a fantastic life. Thank you.
Now, we want this bit to be more of a conversation, really. So if I maybe challenge on what Matthew said, if people want to contribute, just raise your hand and I'll bring people in turn. Just because of the number of people in the room, we've asked for contributions to be brief and to the point. I think that would help, and we'll try and get the discussion going a bit quicker. I suppose there's 2 things that come to mind. One, we're not designing society from scratch, and we haven't got a blank sheet of paper. We have a society with inherent problems, and not everybody in society wants to do their bit and be a good citizen. And in some places there are more people who don't want to do that. But also there's the people in the middle who defer. So defer responsibility to somebody else, and it's a shrug the shoulders because somebody else will come and do it for us. And it's very difficult, particularly for Labour authorities, Labour governments, because our approach is very hierarchical. It is very, let's put our arms around people and look after people and make them very dependent on us, because that gives us a job and we know what we're about, and that makes them come out and vote Labour because they need us. But actually, how do you... So we have society as it is today in Oldham. some very good bits of society, some very bad bits of society. But the one thing that's a given is that no one street in Oldham is the same as the one next door to it. It's all different in very subtle ways in some of them, but they're all very, very different. And it strikes me that to do what you need to do, this isn't about the leader as in the leader of the council or the leader as in the MD of a company. This is about creating leaders on every street corner, so that we have the people there that gives leadership to mobilise people. And I suppose if you've got any examples of where that's worked to an effect, because I mean, if we're talking about serious cultural change, this isn't just a project for 12 months. This is going to take a long time to do. It's going to take 10 years plus to do before we actually see a benefit.
Yeah, well, I think that's, Jim, that's exactly the right kind of question to be asking. And as I said earlier, you know, what gives me faith in you is that you are asking that as a question, not saying that you've got the solution. And I think it is the right question. So the first thing, there's 2 or 3 things involved in what you said. The first is, actually people will do things. In fact, the best motivator is to ask we think the best motivation is to give people things. Actually, the best motivation is to ask people to give something back. But you have to ask them to give something which they feel they have got to give. I remember a colleague of mine, a former colleague of mine, once saying, the problem in politics is hard to reach people. And there's no harder to reach people than politicians. And I think the point he was making there was that politicians ask things of people which often people feel no efficacy about. They don't feel any sense of agency about. Come to a consultation meeting. Well, I don't want to go to a consultation. I'm not really interested in that. So actually you have to start with, what is it that people feel a sense of agency about? What is it they feel that they can do? And then part of that is understanding that within every community, which we have a tendency to look at as problems, there are people finding solutions. There are people making things happen. And so part of the approach that I'm describing is you need to understand those assets which exist in every community, and you need to understand how you link those assets up. So what you've got very often in communities is you've got a group of well-meaning public sector officials looking down on deprived communities saying, well, there's not much happening there, so we need to go in and sort it out. When actually there's a lot of people doing a lot of stuff there, and actually if you could find those people, if you want something done, find someone who's busy, basically.
That's us.
Yeah. So start with the people who are doing things already and say, what more could you do if we gave you more support and we gave you more help? And also, that's the basis for networks. The work that we've done, the RSA did in Peterborough, we did a piece of work on change makers. So what we did was we tried to find out who were the people in Peterborough who actually made things happen. And what was interesting about that work was not only that we identified who these people were, but there were some very interesting patterns to it. So first of all, the closer people were to the front line, the less influence they thought they had. So that was a bit of a problem. So these are not people who identified themselves as change makers. These are people that other people said they make change happen. But the closer you were to people, the less influence you thought you had. Secondly, interestingly, people who were retired thought no one listened to them. So they thought that, because they didn't have a job, so their status had kind of gone down in society, even though they were making things happen. So we start with understanding that there's a lot of stuff going on in communities, but people are very often relatively unsupported in what they're doing. And we start with going to them and asking, how can we support you and how we can help you do the other thing? And if you want to see a tragedy of how this can go wrong, so the New Deal for Communities, did you have a New Deal for Communities here? Yeah. I'm sure it was great here, but... And I'm from London, so I'm sure most of you have seen a London Underground map, right? You know a London Underground map. So basically what happens in communities, real communities are like the London Underground map. That is to say that there are some people who are very isolated right at the end of the line, and there are other people who connect 2 lines, and there's some people like kind of Victoria or King's Cross, they're connecting lots and lots of people. And what New Deal for Communities did was it came in and it kind of ignored all of that, and it said, no, we're building a brand new line. This is the line, and you have to get on this line to travel anywhere. And by the way, in 10 years, we're taking the funding away and closing the line down. And what was found in New Deal for Communities, some of them were successful, but overall what's found was there was less community capacity at the end than there was at the beginning. So we have to start off by finding out where the energy is, connecting those people who have energy. And then when we think about what we're asking them to do, let's not be shy of asking people for things, but ask them to do things which they feel that they can do. a school, I'll finish a long answer, but there's a school near me. They had 2 parents' evenings in 2 weeks. The first parents' evening was come and listen to the curriculum. We want to talk to you about the curriculum and all that. And then the next one was, we're having a fundraiser for the Parents' Association, will you bring your national dish? Right, the first one, 5 parents came to, the second one, 300 parents came to. Because they've been asked in the second one to cook a bit of food and come along and support the school. First one, they were being asked to kind of talk about education, when many of them had a rubbish education themselves and they didn't feel any confidence and it would just be teachers talking down to them. So, you know, we have to think about these things really, really carefully. The energy's out there, but let's start with the people who make things happen and what it is that people feel able to do. That's the first step. Give people a shallow end. One of the worst things about politics is there's no shallow end. Go to a Labour Party meeting, before you know it, you'll be a bloody councillor. You know, so, you know...
I made that mistake.
Yeah, exactly. or the leader, you know. So, you know, give people little steps. The best way, another bit of research I've seen, the best way to make people live sustainably is just get them to do one thing, and then they'll happily do another, and then they'll happily do it. Don't say to them, give up your car, don't fly, stop eating meat tomorrow, because they'll kind of not do it, basically. But if you get them to do one thing, then nothing, then nothing. Build up slowly.
I was interested in your impromptu contribution about that's what we do. So tell us who you are and what you do if you're happy to do that. Oh, so we've got a microphone that's coming on, just so people at the back can hear.
We're members of a community group called Friends of Stoneleigh Park, and we stage roughly 4 events every year in the park, but we've broadened out into the neighbourhood, and we do pothole checks, litter picks. We work with the Youth Inclusion Project, we work with Street Scene, we work with the elderly and the young, combining, putting on events to mix them. We've just started up with Neon, which is neighbouring Networking East Oldham Neighbourhoods, which is all the community groups in East Oldham coming together under one banner. So we've got a stronger voice and we can support each other as groups. So we can effectively target a bigger part of Oldham itself.
And do you feel the local authority is on your side in doing that?
Yeah, it's getting there. I think, I personally feel councillors should be more on ground level as well. Should be getting out there, getting their hands dirty and appreciate. We're giving up our time, we do it on a regular basis. And we're not talking a couple of hours, we're talking every week. Putting things on or doing something in our own community. And I think councillors, whoever it should be out there with us. Get to know the people that vote them in. Let them know they're there to support you, and then they find out at ground level what problems there are, and possibly the community could help solve them.
I think this is a really big and important idea, and actually it's starting to happen in various places now. And in fact, I think the RSA is doing some work with Oldham about it, which is this changing role of councillors is really, really important. And for many, many, many years, and I was a councillor, I'll never forget when I became a councillor, what excited me about it was being a representative. But the second I became a councillor, I was given this big dossier. I was on every committee. I mean, these are in the old days when there were lots of committees. And I spent all my time in County Hall, you know, and it was totally pointless. It was a complete waste of time. And I think actually the councillors are a massive resource, but we need to support and challenge councillors to be social entrepreneurs, to make things happen in their communities. And some councillors are brilliant at that, but you've got two problems with councillors. One is those who just want to sit in the council chamber and collect their expenses, exactly. You know, and to be honest, it's completely pointless. And the other is, which is worse actually, is the community is doing something and the councillor walks in and says, don't worry, I'm the councillor, I'll take over. And actually you don't want either of those things.
No, we don't want that.
No, you don't want that. What you want is you want a councillor who says, look, I know lots of other people, I can connect you to other people who are doing things like you're doing. Yeah. I'm making connections here because I represent this community, so I know lots of people. And also, I know the people in the council who can help you out in various ways. I can kind of open a few doors for you. I can ease the way. I can make things happen.
But I feel it shouldn't be just because Labour's in. I think all councillors,
Yes,
Liberal,
no, all councillors.
Conservatives, anyone, should be working
Yeah.
together with the community alongside each other. And
Well,
not
I
have
completely agree.
point-scoring things.
I agree. Well,
it's interesting
also-
though, Matthew, isn't it, that there's always an acceptance that the councillors are separate from the community.
Yeah.
And it's a given, the way we've been talking around. And the more it's gone on, even on the time that I've been on the council in kind of 9 years, and people have been on far longer than I have, the role is becoming far, far more demanding, and it's becoming far, far more professionalised. So you get dragged into the town hall, the civic centre, and you get indoctrinated as this is the job, this is what you got to do. And if you see the light of day, you're lucky. By the time you come out, it's usually dark and everybody else has gone to bed. When actually as a Labour Party, as a Liberal Party, as a Tory Party or whatever, the selection process is all geared up not to get community representatives, is it? It's all about getting people on the party list through a system, when actually, if we're talking about community representatives, the voice of the community, then those people should be within that community, shouldn't they? We shouldn't be drafting councillors in and imposing them on the community. You know,
But your point also about other parties is really true, and I think it's a challenge now to leaders of any council, you know, where there's a one-party dominant, which is you must devolve power within the local authority to local level. And in Westminster, I know someone who's been a Labour councillor in Westminster for about 25 years, and it would be a miserable life. But actually, give Westminster their due. They have given all their councillors a small budget, and the councillors, he runs a competition amongst local residents in his ward, and then he spends money on really interesting. He created a dog walkers club last year, you know, because that's what people voted for. So it was a fantastic thing. So I think absolutely, even if it's Labour, I don't know what the balance here is, but if it was Labour 80%, I would say still give some power, a little bit of money to the Conservative and Liberal Democrat councillors so they can make a difference.
Yeah. Warren at the back. Warren, if you just wait for the microphone to find its way to you.
If you do, I want a recording of this.
First of all, up to now I welcome this meeting. It's a tremendous breath of fresh air by the leader of the council. It's been needed for a long time. That's what I'm going to say. Change makers. Well, I believe, can you solve that? I welcome change makers, but can I just clear something up that you said before, Matthew? You said people are so rude. Do you mean me, the electorate? When in your first opening few minutes, you said people are so rude. Who did you mean? Because we're all members of Oldham, but you know, we're the constituents in Oldham. Did you mean constituents?
No. Actually, you know, I know, because I've got feeling
Right, well,
I've got feeling in on the point.
You can come back to me with that one.
Oh, okay.
First of all, I welcome your enthusiasm to change, and I welcome Jim's, because I think he's trying to change, and he's got a long way ahead of him. But when a councillor, and I'm speaking as an ex-chairman of my local Labour Party, when a councillor is elected to represent his electorate in his area, when he goes to the council, he seems to become an employee of the council. A councillor used to be a job you did out of civic duty to serve your local community without any thought of financial reward. Out-of-pocket expenses you used to get only. Do you know they're on nearly 15 grand a year, some of them, and more now? And when they get on that hill there after they give the leaflets out, they leave behind the people that they say they're going to represent, because they become employees. And Jim just mentioned it there, the bureaucracy and red tape of people on fantastic amounts of money up there. I don't want my councillor to go out there and then become an employee of the council when he gets up there on the big hill. I want him to do what he says in his leaflet and represent the local community. And there might be a few rude ones, like you've said, but the people that turn up and vote, they're the right people that should be represented. He had a 34% turnout at the last local elections in this borough. People are getting wide to it. And unless we do things like you're saying, under Jim, and change things a little bit more, and get away from this bureaucracy up here, and the doctrinating, I don't think we'll make much progress. Thank you.
Well, I think, well, for a start, I think there are different councillors, and I think that we have a system now of a cabinet and backbench councillors or frontline councillors, whatever you want to call them. And I think that you do need some councillors who spend quite a lot of time doing the work. It's a complex job, and I also don't think that anybody becomes a councillor to become rich. So I don't think people do it for the wrong reasons, and I think, you know, most people I know who lead councils.
Matthew, £15,000 a year is a full-time job. There's people on less than that in the borough of Oldham.
Yeah, well, I'm sure there are, but look, I don't have a problem about the fact that if someone is a politician, that they get remunerated. You know, they don't. As I say, it's not something that you do to get rich, and it's certainly not something that you do to get popular. What I want to say about this is that we have this problem about our relationship with politicians. And I think I'm not saying this about you at all, but I think what fundamentally it's about is that we expect politicians to be, and this is a point about the story I was telling, because the reason I told the story about someone being rude was the point I was making was that most of the time when you're a politician, you're trying to say you're ordinary like everybody else, and then some of the time people want you to be, they don't want you to be ordinary at all, they want you to be a very, very different kind of person. And actually, we've got to have a more authentic conversation. That's why I've said we want leaders who ask questions, who don't give answers. I want to give you an example of the kind of political leadership that you see very rarely, and maybe it was an extremist, but I think it was really interesting. There's a contrast. So we criticise politicians. At the last general election, Gordon Brown, Nick Clegg, David Cameron all got up at those debates, and they all said, we're going to have to make cuts, but don't worry, they won't actually affect anything you care about. And when we all knew it was bollocks. Yeah. But if any of them had said, no, actually, we're going to have to make some really horrible decisions, they'd have been all over the newspapers, and we probably wouldn't have elected them, because we'd have said they committed a gaffe, right? So, you know, we've got a real breakdown in the communication that we have with politicians, because we expect them to do things which lead them to then hide away from us and not tell us the truth. You know that line, Jack Nicholson line in A Few Good Men, you know, tell us the truth, you can't handle the truth. And most politicians I know, they feel that if they really told the truth, they'd be out of office within 6 weeks. So, you know, we have to attend to that. Now, I want to give you an example of the kind of leadership that I think we need, which is Barack Obama. I don't know if you remember, but Barack Obama in his election campaign, it was found that he'd been going to the services of a preacher, Jeremiah White I think he was called, and he was a kind of anti-white racist, this preacher. You know, he kind of was full of vitriol against the white majority in America. And it could have been really embarrassing for Barack Obama. And I guess the typical political response to that would have been to say he hadn't really gone to his services, or to just denounce him, or hope the issue could go away. And what Barack Obama did was he made a speech, a really brilliant, powerful speech. And what he basically said was, I shouldn't have gone. He shouldn't have said what he did, but listen, actually we're screwed up about race. As a country, we are screwed up about race, and I'm part of that problem. And white people are screwed up about race, and black people are screwed up about race. And this, what happened to me, what I've done is an example of a conversation. He actually used the phrase, this is an unfinished conversation for our country. And that's what we need, is we need politicians who, instead of soaking up all this stuff that we want, which is often contradictory, are actually got the ability to turn it back to us and say, look, I can't solve this. We have got to have a conversation, a better conversation about this if we're going to have any chance of solving this problem. Now, it's very brave kind of leadership, but that's the kind of leadership we need.
Yeah, I mean, it's very difficult when politicians are on a pedestal, and for some reason somebody's chosen to put us on one today, to be taken off. And that's, you know, the political sport that we're in, between the newspapers, the electorate and politicians. It's this sport that doesn't seem to show any signs of waning. But fundamentally, councillors, and councillors are different to MPs, or certainly they should be different to MPs, should be the voice of the community they say they represent. But in reality, they're not. We've moved so far away from that. And actually, partly it's because getting good quality candidates is actually very, very difficult. Just as a political party, it's very difficult. And whether people accept it or not, by and large, we are in a party political state here. You know, there's very, very few independents actually get elected, because people go and vote for the party that the father and mother voted for, and the grandfather voted for, because that's what people do.
But it's not, can I just say, Jim, it's not just, I mean, that is absolutely true. And I remember actually John Maples, who died a couple of days ago, the Conservative, telling a story at an event I was at, where he said that in his local constituency, they couldn't find anyone to stand for the council. And they thought about it really, really, really hard. And in the end, they thought, we'll go to the butcher, because he's very popular. He's never been to the Conservative Party. We know nothing about him, but he's a small businessman. And they said, we can't really ask someone to be a councillor, you know, if he's never been to a party. No, let's just go and get someone who's popular. So they went and they saw the book. They said, look, would you stand for the Conservatives? He said, well, I'd love to. He said, but I agreed to stand for the Liberal Democrats yesterday. So, you know, but this is a point which is more controversial. It's not just councillors. Oldham will be full of other people who claim to represent people, and they don't really represent anybody at all. They'll be full of people in the third sector who say, I represent all this user group, and well, they're getting paid a decent salary for running this organisation, or I represent this community. I'm a community leader, you know. So I would find it fascinating that people who are self-appointed community leaders, who were never voted for by anybody, attack councillors for being unrepresentative. I remember in Manchester several years ago, I can say this because it was several years ago, but I remember talking, well, actually I can't because it's the same leader and the same chief executive, but anyway. Well, it's too late now. It's too late now. Anyway, but they said, look, in the end, in order to have a consultation with the public, we had to go round the people who said they represented the community, because these people were kind of full-time rabble-rousers, and actually talk to people themselves, because these people weren't speaking on behalf of anybody at all. So this problem, you know, when we're criticising councillors of representative nature, let's also think about the problem of representation which exists more broadly in the community, of people who are ever jumping up and saying, I represent X and Y and Z, and they don't represent them at all.
Okay, we've got...
I just wanted to make a point on...
sorry, were you indicating for... Oh, okay, well, if we take people in order, just to...
Yeah.
Is that okay? No, you go ahead then, Sue, and then Dave McGeely at the back, please.
I'm a customer involvement officer with First Choice Homes.
Can't hear you.
Sorry, I'm a customer involvement officer with First Choice Homes Oldham, and I just wanted to pick up on one of the points you made in terms of going around community leaders. One of the things that we've been working on in Oldham over the last year is this idea of connectors.
Yeah.
So they're the people behind those community leaders. And I think what you're talking about is how we support those connectors to become change makers, and take the change from there then and spread it out. So I think it's interesting that you're kind of leading to that, and I'm glad that Oldham is on that track already. The other point I just wanted to make is, well, this idea of introducing people to the shallow end. One of the other things that we recognise as First Choice Homes, when we've asked people about the skills that they have, is you might need to ask them 2 or 3 times before they admit they've got a skill that would be of value to the community.
Absolutely.
So those are the 2 points.
I think that those are brilliant points, and just very quickly, because I'm talking too much, but in relation to the first, we did some work in Lewisham in London. We did social network mapping. And I think it really is, this tool of mapping people's social networks is a really important part of a new way of thinking about change, actually. Because it does throw up all sorts of interesting... We found that the biggest connector in this community wasn't a councillor, and it wasn't a person who worked for New Deal for Communities, it was a person who ran the local pub. Now, fortunately, he was called Phil Nice, which kind of helped. I mean, if he was called Phil Nasty, maybe it'd all been different. But anyway, but he was the person who most people knew. But no, because he ran the pub, no one ever asked him to do anything else. You know, he organised a brilliant quiz night and all that, but no one ever said to him, what else could you do? What do you think? And when he was asked, he was really excited by it. We also found that one of the places that people most often met in was B&Q. You know, it wasn't the community centre. It was, you know, and so we talked to B&Q about how they could use their store more to get people to talk to each other, and Sainsbury's was the same. So where people meet, where people are comfortable, who connects, often this stuff is really invisible to us. And so we kind of trample all over it, we don't take advantage of it. And in relation to your second point, what was it about?
Introducing people to the shallow end.
Yeah.
Getting them to admit actually they have something to offer.
Exactly, and I was talking a few months ago to Emma Harrison, who was involved. She's not anymore because she got into trouble with her company, but she was involved in troubled families work. And she said her strategy was very simple. She would go to troubled families and she would say to them, can you help the family down the road? And it would completely stun them, because no one had ever asked them to do anything for anybody else. You know, they had 15 professionals intervening in their lives. And for the first time someone said, do you think you could help out? What do you mean help out? I'm dysfunctional, I'm troubled, I'm a problem. No, could you just go and help out? So absolutely right. You know, if you ask people again and again, everyone's got something to offer, for goodness sake.
I do like the idea of customer involvement officers, where we involve them whether they like it or not. there is an element to which that's the very hierarchical model, isn't it? Which is, all right, we know our defined estates and there'll be an officer aligned to each of those estates, and we'll do this. I just wonder if there's
for ourselves in terms of customer involvement, our title actually is as a neighbourhood.
It's more of a development
officer,
really, isn't it?
And we see involvement as beginning with engagement and including consultation, involvement, and then capacity building. But we're certainly, again, presenting ourselves as neighbourhood officers as opposed to involvement, as you say, just to take away that hierarchy and people seeing us as the focus for involvement solely.
Could I just ask the lady behind, why did you get involved? So you do all these wonderful things in the community group, but why? Why did you bother?
I moved to the area, and it was the first time I'd actually been in council property. It was a series of circumstances. Husband was ill, going to lose the house, and it's like, do you get repossessed? Do you go into social housing? So it's a case of you don't really have a choice of where you put when you're in that position. And I was actually put on Durka, and I went. I thought I didn't know anyone. I thought, I can either sit here behind my front door, or I can actually get out there and try and make friends. And by going to a couple of local meetings, met Carol and Angela, and the rest is history.
Because I do think we underestimate the social aspect
Oh no, absolutely.
of this.
Can I just say though, it actually started with some of the dog walkers in the park and getting together with groundwork and things like that we started. Well, Angela started it actually, she's our main source. But we had a cabin in the park which social services used, which we was hoping to be able to take over, but it didn't happen. Social services used it through the day, and fortunately we got in and started using it in the evening, and unfortunately that got burnt down. But in the process of Durka and all the negativity happened in Durka with the HMR and the funding being stopped, they vacated the double cabin which was on Flint Street. So we started lobbying for that cabin rather than it being taken elsewhere. Could we have it in our park? And it's developed from there with the support of the council, our local, one of our local councils especially, and the district partnership, who actually paid for it to get into the park, but then there was no money to get it set up. So Angela lobbied different companies, and I don't know if we should say the names. Well, Emmanuel Whittakers in the rear, they rewired it, which cost the council nothing. They get it all ready. And then Bramall's, Angela lobbied them as well to see what they could do for us, and they actually stepped in, as well as the district partnership, to put the ramps and the entrances in. And with working with certain parts of the council, it got up and running. And we actually run it for the young people. We have a drop-in with no library in the area, with no community centre. We have a lot of empty space for builders if they wish to come on Durka, and we're reaching out from there. We had a group of children that we had antisocial behaviour with, and we thought, right, we can tell them not to do it and bring the police and one thing and another, but we thought, right, we'll start talking with them and get them involved. And Angela secured funding from different places. Voluntary Action Oldham were absolutely superb, and First Choice Homes. And we just lobbied different people, got funding, we got referee training. And the actual main one of that group, a young girl, actually went through the referee training, and she was like the others peered with her. And that group of children listened to her in a lot of things. So we got her on the referee training. She did the course. She now referees matches. She is not causing antisocial behaviour. The other children are not, because she's followed them. And we have 40, well, we've 140 on the register for Thursday night, but we usually average about 40 children on a Thursday night, which we do various things with. But we have a boot club on Thursday afternoon, which we bring the older ones in, and it's the noisiest group of the lot. And I think he's not, is it? Charlie Parker came one day when we brought both of them together, and it was like bedlam, but it was good. And that's how it's happening. But it's lobbying people, going out. We took 60 twice over to the pantomime, so we brought from 103 to 3-year-old, 60 people. That was the age limit. And we took them to the pantomime at the Coliseum. And we've just done various things, but our idea is to bring Durka back into a community. I've lived there 60 years plus, and I didn't want to see it destroyed. And I think slowly we are coming together, and we're getting a lot. As we spoke about our council, we did have quite a lot of negativity. It's like, you know, the community's taking over things.
God forbid, whatever next.
Didn't like
Fantastic, really inspiring.
But it really is. But now we're moving forward, and Durka will become a place that people want to live in, because we started it with the help of different agencies coming together, and somebody also who knows where to tap into it. Angela, and she won the Pride in Oldham Award last year because of her individual thing. And that's what it is. It needs 1 or 2 or 3 or 4. We have regular meetings.
There's a quote.
With 20 at a meeting.
There's a quote, you might have heard it, it's a fantastic quote, which is, never imagine that a small group of determined people can't change the world. That's all that's all that ever has.
Yeah.
That's all that ever has changed the world, is a small group of determined people.
Yeah. The kids litter pick, they know now, they tell other people not to drop litter.
Well, that's, now, one of the things you said which is really important about how you make change happen is peer groups. So we blame parents a lot for what young people do, but actually young people, by overwhelmingly what influences them is what their friends do. And by the way, in case you haven't thought this tonight was useful, I'm going to give you a tip, which is based on lots and lots of research I've done. So this is something you've got for free, okay? So would anybody in the room like to be a better person? Yeah. Only a few of you. the rest of you are either perfect or evil. Right. So I'm kind of going to assume that just because you're shy, right? So, yeah, okay, right. So I'm summarising all the evidence now, and it's very clear. Don't buy self-help books, right? They don't work. They do not work. They just make you miserable. You know, the 7 steps to being healthy. You'll do the first 2, and then you leave the book, and every time you look at the book, it makes you feel guilty and have a donut or whatever. So even though every bookshop's full of them, don't read them. They do not work. No evidence that they work. If you want to be a better person, it's really simple. Just choose better friends. So if you're a smoker, you want to give up smoking, have non-smoking friends. If you're a bit overweight, you want to get slimmer, choose thinner friends. Why does religion work? Why does religion work? You didn't ask me to talk about whether God exists. That's another lecture. The reason religious people, on the whole, overall, are happier and do more for the community is because they mix with other people having a conversation about what they believe and what they want to give back. Right? So the way you make change happen is to find those networks. And if you can find 1 or 2 people in those networks who start to change the way they behave, then it can ripple out. But the problem for many young people is they live in a circle. They never go to, I mean, you know, people who never even go to town centre from their estate. They only know people like them. That's one of the problems, for example, about people on drugs. They only know other people on drugs. When they come off the drugs, they go back to a friendship circle where everybody's on drugs. So one of the methods of achieving change is to find out people's networks and try to connect so that if you just get a couple of people to change, it can have an enormous effect on everybody else. Like your referee.
Okay, Sue, and then Dave, did you indicate at the back?
Sue Walker, First Choice Homes. I mean, the discussions led on really since I was going to kind of ask this question. But I was particularly interested in you talking about going to communities to find their own solutions. And First Choice Homes are just looking at getting involved in the kind of health and wellbeing agenda and going to some of our communities and talking about well-being and what some of the communities think are the issues of well-being in their communities. And I guess, you know, for me, this has been something I've kind of thought about really carefully. I think to some extent you just have to sort of dive in, don't you? It's really there's risks, aren't there, attached to going to communities and talking about issues like that, in case they come up with some of the wicked issues that you started off talking about. So some of the biggest issues in their communities might be people are drinking too much, or there's too many drugs and that sort of thing. And then thinking about how we, as a community action plan, to deal with that is not an easy thing to do. So starting those kinds of discussions, in some ways, you potentially raising expectations about what the community might think you can do to help. So that action planning then becomes difficult, and it's kind of in some ways it's being brave, isn't it? Starting those discussions and trying to find solutions together. We have to be brave to do that.
I think it is about that, but I think it also is about really listening very, very hard to what people are saying to you. And you know, we heard about dog walking. You know. So people who are not fit in all sorts of other ways, but they'll walk their dogs. And actually I've seen a scheme, really good scheme, which got people who walk dogs to still start walking a bit further with their dog. That was a simple thing to do. And then that's one step. And don't say to people, right, go out and buy a running outfit tomorrow and start doing 10 kilometres a day, because that's not going to work. But also understand, I mean, I saw a very interesting piece of work that was done amongst people who had diabetes. And what it found was that although they didn't want to have diabetes, having diabetes was part of their identity. It kind of was part of the structure of their lives. And they were living with it. And for them it wasn't really a problem in the way that you might think it was a problem. It just was part of their who they were. And people would come along and say, I'm going to help you with your problem. And that wasn't how it felt to them. So I think you have to start off by really, really listening to what people say matters to them. And well-meaning people talk about health and well-being. I mean, I'm not criticising you, but that would be enough to put anybody off, to be quite frank. You know, I think you have to start with saying to people, what would you like to do more of? What is it that you can't do that you'd like to do more of? Or what is it that you do now that you could do a bit more of? So start. Abraham Lincoln once said, if you had 7 hours to cut down a tree, you'd spend 6 hours sharpening the axe. And I think if we spent a lot more time really understanding what the problem was, the solution becomes apparent. But too often we go in assuming we know what the problem is, and then we develop a solution that's based on our assumptions which aren't correct.
Is it not something, just to kind of keep the conversation moving on, that actually, what is our value system? I mean, housing market renewal in Oldham has left a lot of people distinctly unhappy with government and council, because for a lot of people it was based on a community being judged on the value of the terrace properties in that area. And it completely dismissed the people who were living in them. And I think there is a sense of, as a council, as people who are spending public money and intervening and using legal powers to do all that, we seriously have to change the way we choose to use the resources to do that. Because I mean, there's one thing sending an officer in to go and talk at somebody, there's another one going and say, actually, the community is so terrible, we're going to demolish it all and disperse you across Oldham and see how you get on. And then hope that there's going to be a community afterwards. But don't worry, because if there isn't, we'll probably spend a couple of £1 million employing professionals to come and create one. And that kind of cycle of kind of we know best, when actually what we've done is to completely underestimate the community that existed there. The examples that you've given and the places that you've worked, of where that's worked, but actually, because there is a lot of pressure. If you go into an area and you see that the housing stock is in such terrible condition and the environmental quality is so bad, then if you get any sense of responsibility, you want to do something about it. But actually, maybe the approach is we use the resources on the people rather than the physical conditions of an area. Because actually, the work that you've done on Stoneleigh Park and in Durka has probably cost the council almost nothing. Has probably cost the taxpayer almost nothing. But the impact you've had, because you said, actually, we need this, this and this, so we're going to go ahead and do it, is quite powerful, really. There's a story there that we need to tell in different places, I think.
And also, we mustn't miss out, because it was mentioned, it is really important. I made this point a couple of times, but the social side, start with the things that people enjoy. You know, I was talking to a group the other day, which is a fantastic community group, and it started with a group called Knit and Natter. So it started with people knitting, because what they found was that actually young women are quite into, I think it's mainly women, but into knitting now. It's become a bit trendy. So suddenly, older women who knew how to knit, they were amazed that younger women wanted to know how to knit. And so suddenly the older women and the younger women had something in common. And then from that, all sorts of other things started to develop. And I think sport's often like that. You know, I've seen in my area, I've seen 2 dads in 10 years create a football team that is charter marked and has got, you know, they raised lots of money, and it all just started with their enthusiasm for what they did, because, you know, people will do anything if they love what they're doing. You know, so that's what we have to start with.
Okay. Dave at the back.
Thank you. Can I apologise, David McGeely, can I apologise, Matthew, for my late arrival? That's more a factor of my chaotic
It's
life.
fine. I was absolutely brilliant before you arrived, though.
They said that,
Yeah.
rather than the merit of your talk. Can I say, my point to make is about consultation. It takes me back to a conversation that we were having about 10 years ago about consultation, and we thought we'd made the point then to people that if we're going to talk about consultation, then please let's all be meaning the same thing, because sometimes we do get consultation, and when you do, that means that your mind's not made up, things are open, we can change it, we can amend it, you'll value what we're going to say and what our ideas are, and we can be involved, etc. However, unfortunately, sometimes some of these consultation events are more of an informing event. Here it is, come along, look, this is what's happening, are you all right with that? Or it may be demonstrating that, or presenting it. And we can't call that consultation, because if we do, I expect certain things to be available. And if they're not, I get really disappointed. It might be an event that sometimes this consultation is really about explaining. Sometimes when that's the case, that things are open for modification, but not always. Sometimes it's just an endorsement that you're having. Come and endorse our ideas. This is what we plan to do. Come and tell us if you agree with it. We're not really going to be able to change it too much, but, you know, and I'd welcome that, you know. And then every so often there's a consultation event or a consultation process that is really about, well, I can put it in the report that we've consulted and I can tick the box and we can move on. And really, you might as well just put your forms in the corner of the room. If we're going to involve people, then we really do have to involve them at an early stage. You were talking before, and you were mentioning about the, if you like, the tiny grassroots event that make a big difference and that can grow on it. But in the process of people's enthusiasm and support growing, you can't really, I don't know how I can express it in a clean way. You can't really spoil people. Once they're trying to get into it, if you go and trample all over their ideas and their thoughts and their contributions, all you'll do is just kill off any developments. And we've got to be careful about that, because I really do believe that consultation and involvement are huge drivers for change and a huge mechanism for getting people on your side. But let's make sure that we use the right language. If we're not really wanting people to change it, then don't.
Yeah, well, I agree with that, and I think it's a bit of a boring answer, but in the end, you've got to use the right mechanism for what it is you're trying to do. And you can't make decisions in mass meetings, and if you're pretending you're making a decision in a mass meeting, you're just not telling the truth, because it's just a rubbish way of doing something like that. So the method I think we still don't use nearly enough is kind of citizens jury type method, where you just get a group of ordinary citizens together, not self-appointed leaders, but just a representative group of ordinary, just like a jury for a case, and they spend a day really getting into an issue in depth, which you can't do in a consultation or a mass meeting, really get into it in depth and then give their views. And when that's done properly, I remember Patricia Hewitt, I used to know, she developed this methodology. And there has to be hospital closure in her constituency. Now, normally when hospitals close, you get a massive backlash, even though it was a good decision to close hospital because it was old and it wasn't very good. But people didn't want to close the hospital, so everyone would, no, don't close the hospital. And all sorts of people who want to be self-appointed community leaders run a campaign, stop the SWP come out. And she organised the citizens. She took the risk. She said, no, she got 30 citizens in who represented various, just ordinary people, selected to represent the community, but not community leaders, and they spent 2 days looking at the argument, and she invited the local media to come along, so that was the risk. And at the end of the 2 days, with the health managers there, they said, no, we think this is right, you should close the hospital, but we want better bus routes to the new hospital, and we want some kind of minor injuries facility left behind. And the health authority said, that's fine. And the local newspaper said, this is a good decision. There was no protest, and the whole thing went through. So, you know, you have to use the right mechanism for the right kind of decision. And often we go out to people and say, here's a really complicated planning decision, and we're going to get a group of councillors on the stage who you're annoyed with anyway. And then someone in the audience stands up and says, they're all bastards, they're all trying to screw us. Everyone goes, hey, that's it. And then the councillors think, well, that was a waste of time. You can't trust the public. And the public think that was a waste of time. They weren't really listening. And we all go home and we all feel miserable. So you're quite right. You have to have the right mechanism. You have to be absolutely clear about what it is you're trying to do with that mechanism.
Yeah, Matthew, you're right there, you're spot on. We tried to save Ancoats Hospital in Manchester, and we did exactly what you just said. We got a small surgery in its place, and everybody was happy down there. Exactly what we did down there, local people.
I remember trying to close a school years ago when I was a county councillor in Warwickshire. It's an absolutely true story. I was in a village and we tried to close the school, and one parent was brave enough, because everyone was shouting and screaming at us, to say, well, you know, maybe we do need to do something about the school because it's really very dilapidated. You know, it's got rats. And another parent got up, I'm absolutely true, and said, yes, but we love our school rats. So, you know, once you get into that dynamic, it's quite difficult to get out of.
Just for some context, Ancoats Hospital is now luxury apartments. It's amazing how time changes. I mean, in reality, what we don't do as a council, as the public sector, or as people just trying to govern, is to get across properly within the constraints that we've got, financial constraints, legal constraints and all the other stuff. Actually, in a lot of things, our own hands are tied. So it's not as though we go out to the public and we say, we're doing this whether you like it or not because we want to do it. It's actually, we have given it some thought, believe it or not, and we have researched it and we've come to an informed view ourselves. And I think if we are going to do that, I'm going to say, actually, as a public, there's very little you can change in this, and maybe we should say that. But at the moment, the system just doesn't allow it, because you're right. There's far too much of, we have to go out to consult because we've got a box to tick to say that we've consulted. Yeah. And actually, housing
associations do a lot of that, by the way.
Yeah.
A lot of tenant satisfaction box ticking.
I should say we've actually learned a lot from regeneration, certainly in our involvement in Alton Shoulder. We took that jury approach,
right, and
rather than having one big meeting, we had a series of meetings over 2-week periods where we had these small juries. And you're right.
But if we're going to get a quality consultation, we also need to consult less. We consult about a hell of a lot as local authorities, government, and all the other stuff. The vast majority of which is nonsense, and what we don't do is to go and talk to people about things that they actually care about. So the vast majority of decisions that the council makes, there is no consultation whatsoever on. We just do it as a matter of course. And the big projects usually cost a lot of money, like a brand new school. Well, most people are going to support a school unless they live on the playing field that it's going to be built on.
But sometimes, Jim, just to say this, sometimes, and it goes back to what I said about leadership, sometimes you've got to say, I'm the leader, I think it's the right thing to do, and you can get rid of me in 3 years or 4 years if you think I'm wrong.
Or 10.
You do have to do. No, let's remember, when Ken Livingstone voted through the congestion, when he put through the congestion charge, there wasn't a single person who was supporting him at that time, and he just said, what do you think of Ken Livingstone now? But no one wants to go back on the congestion charge. He said, I'm doing it, it's the right thing to do, and you can chuck me out in 4 years if you want me. You know, so, and actually, if you say that to people, if you stand up in front of them and you say, I'm doing this because I think it's right and I know you don't support it, but, you know, that's what you've elected me to do, then as long as you don't do it all the time on every issue, but if you sometimes, that's what people expect of leaders. People aren't unreasonable. People won't always say, well, you've got to consult us. I say, okay, fine, well, we'll see. If it goes wrong, then it'll be on your head, but, you know, you're the leader.
Are there any other contributions?
I've got to go in 2 minutes.
You have, yeah.
I'll take these two and answer them.
We got the youth council representatives, so we definitely need to get a question, and our deputy youth mayor has just put a hand up, so we need to get a microphone across.
We've got the microphone here, actually. Would I be able to make my point? Or
make your point then.
Okay.
While Shelley's tied up, if you take the microphone then to the back.
Sure. First of all, thank you for the lecture, Matthew. The stuff that you were saying about the leaving it to technology and the 4 groups we were talking about, the egalitarianism, and the individual are all represented at some point here today. I'm myself here as an individual, but I know some people are here representing various groups, and I can see some people that have been kind of dragged along from work who don't really want to be here, but I won't name any names. And also a little bit of fatalism that's going on as well. I can hear people talking about the council are bad and the sort of the electorate are good, that type of thing. I don't think it's polemic as that. I think we kind of need to stay away from that. What I'm really interested in, what I can do as an individual to make change within the devolved communities that we've got. I'm currently in Failsworth, which is, it doesn't really have it, so it has been devolved. And I'm interested very much in what you were saying before, the ladies from, so I've written this down, Stoneleigh Park in Durka, their community groups, that was very, very inspiring, I think, what they said, and I think they actually, if I can just hijack the microphone, give them a round of applause for that, if they would, please, because I think that was, that's really something that's inspired me, but really I'm interested in what I can do as an individual in my area to help change things. I do know, I mean, my small contribution is this. I'm aware on Facebook there is a community group called I Love Royton, for example. That is an individual person who's set up his own sort of scheme to sort of bring the community together a little bit, and I would like to see that a little bit more from all the other devolved areas that we've got. That's really my contribution.
But surely the answer is to say to the community, just do it.
Well,
I mean,
I don't know what you are. You a councillor or? No. Right. Okay. The first thing I'd do, if you really, I'm sure you do have ideas, but the first thing I'd do is just spend a weekend just walking around and looking. Just you'll see people and they're gathering and they're doing something together. They're in a park and someone's organising the kids to play football. Who is that person? Go and chat to them. People are gathering in another place. What's going on there? Why is that working? You know, chat to people. Who do you think is good? Who do you rate? Who makes things happen? Oh, it's a primary school teacher. Or it's this. So just, all I would say is, before you do anything, just spend a bit of time talking, listening, watching, and then you'll start to see, we don't see the wood for the trees. That's the reality of it. You know, we look at communities and we just don't see what's in them very often. And actually there's all sorts of stuff happening. It's a bit like when you're in a garden, you look at the garden and nothing's happening. And then you look really close and you start to see things moving around. Then you realise there's loads of stuff moving around. You just hadn't looked at it. You just hadn't looked at it properly. You hadn't focused, got the lens right. So I would say, you know, just before you do anything, just make sure that you're really aware of what's going on and who's making things happen. And then go and speak to them. And once you've spoken to them, you'll be bursting with ideas.
Okay, we're going to take one final question then. Matthew does have to leave to get his train connection.
I do, unfortunately.
Yeah.
I know you need to leave soon, so I'll try and keep it really brief.
That's all right.
It was mostly just about, it's all about individuals and what they can do to make a change and what they can do to improve Oldham. And it was more so a point to consider of, sometimes you said it's best to kind of go past the community leaders and get to the actual individuals. It was just kind of, do you think it would be better to do that or to go through, there are neighbourhood groups, I mean I'm part of the Oldham Youth Council, there are people set up that do represent people. Do you view it better to go through those groups or to go straight to the individuals to ask for their opinion?
Let me be clear, because there's something I don't think I've been clear about. We're all individuals. You know, in that sense, Margaret Thatcher was right when she said there's no such thing as society, there's just individuals and families. I mean, in a way, that is true. We are all individuals and families, and we constitute society together. But what I'm saying is, I was talking about something slightly different to individuals, and I'm talking about individualism as a way of thinking about change. And all I'm saying is that we often underplay the importance of people just being ambitious and wanting to achieve things for themselves. And I think that that's actually a particular problem for, there's a particular tradition in the Labour Party of being suspicious of people's desire to get on and succeed in their own lives. And we're always looking for collective solutions and state solutions, rather than giving people the freedom to kind of do their own thing, because actually people are quite resourceful and creative. So that's the point about individualism. It's just that it's a kind of force, a power in society, and we don't tap into it enough. But in terms of your other point, I think you've got to be pragmatic about it. If your youth council really does represent young people, if you stand in that room and that room is broadly representative of the community of Oldham, and if those people do things, if you say to those people, what do you do? And they are running a group, they're making something happen, they're running a little business in their bedroom, whatever it is, they're doers, then work with that group, absolutely. All I'm saying is that sometimes you go into rooms and people say, I represent the community, I've been representing the community for 25 years. And that's because the community haven't had the courage to say to you, Reg, just bugger off and leave us alone. So, you know, you have to be, you have to be pragmatic about it and just be a little bit, all I'm saying is be a little bit suspicious of some people who tell you that they represent people.
Yeah.
All right. I'm sorry, if there's anyone called Reg in the room, I'm really sorry.
It's nothing personal. Well, I mean, today really has been the start of an ongoing conversation that we'll be having in Oldham probably for the next decade, I guess, which is how do you create a society and a town that people aspire to live in and where everybody plays their part. The challenge for us, I suppose, in trying to create a cooperative borough is the test will come as well, what do you do with the people who don't want to play the part, and even worse, the people who want to actually rail against the people who want to do the best for the town. And there's a constant conflict there, so perhaps that will be a future debate, but I hope we've done enough to at least attract you to the next session when it's advertised. Can we thank Matthew in the usual way?